the camera facing the right way. Just tell me if it's going there.
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
But...
Assuming, hopefully, we're alive now with CelloChat. My name is Brinton Smith. I'm the principal cellist of the Houston Symphony, theoretically, when we actually play concerts. We are currently canceled until May 10th, and I teach at the Shepherd School, where we are now a virtual online school for the rest of the semester. So we are, Paul had the idea to try to make the best of this and add some extra cello chats to talk to people about different things. And this cello chat is going to be devoted a little bit to expanding the cello repertoire, which is something I've been pretty passionate about. You just need to read the comments, you don't need to listen. So we'll talk a little bit about this kind of unusual situation we find ourselves in. It's unprecedented in my lifetime. It's probably been about 100 years since we've been through something like this. And I have to say I'm full of admiration for the energy and the creativity that so many of my colleagues have put into sharing music. I mean, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, I have not, I haven't felt as motivated. It's been a little bit of a depressing circumstance for me. For so many of us who are so used to the interaction with the public and to kind of feed off the idea of making music for people, the idea to, we had a fantastic class of students at Rice that I really loved working with, and to lose half a semester of that, especially when some of them are leaving, has been very tough for me. To lose the concerts that we were doing, to lose even that kind of rhythm of life is been very strange and very unsettling, and we're going to face tough times. Most of the orchestras are going to face very tough times as they come back. Most of the arts institutions, I'd like to suggest to you that, I mean, maybe certainly donations of money, but maybe the most positive and kind of for positive action you could make for them is to buy tickets for the next season, kind of an affirmation that life will go back and life will continue on. Anyway, so talking of like the repertoire for the cello, we do not have the luxury of the unbelievable repertoire that the piano has or that the violin has, but we have actually a much greater repertoire than we perform. There is a kind of situation where we've been narrowing the repertoire that we play more and more. I would say 95% of the cellists play only about 5% of the repertoire that's out there. And I mean, to be honest, the difference between performers is small compared to the difference between the actual compositions. And if you look at this from the point of view of the audience, if you look at this from the point of view of what the people we make this music for want, it would be much more interesting and a much more motivating musical experience, I think, to also experience not just another Brahms sonata, not just another Beethoven sonata, but something they've never heard before, particularly if it's music you really believe in. Let me just take a minute here and check if I'm talking loud enough. Can people hear me? If anyone's there?
Yeah, but there's a question, so.
Okay, let me go a little more ramble, and then we'll go into the questions. This idea that I try to instill in my students, and that I'd love to instill in all of you, is that it's our responsibility as cellists to add something, not just to go try to play and have people praise us. And it's not just about being fortunate enough maybe to make a living or to have applause and that's not enough. You have to add something. You have to leave the music further than where you found it. You have to do something for your colleagues, for your instrument, for the music. And that means you need to explore repertoire. Now, not everyone, there's something, once when I was interviewing Sophie Feuermann, she said something that has always stuck with me. She said there's this strange idea today that everyone has to be good at every kind of repertoire. And she was talking about, she gave the example of Horowitz, and she was talking about, I mean, for her, she said, you know, when he plays Mozart, it's a disaster, but when he plays, you know, Carmen Fantasy or something, it's amazing, it's fantastic. And she said, why should it be? And there are pianists who are great at Mozart, who you wouldn't want to hear play Rachmaninoff, maybe. Why does everybody have to be playing the same repertoire? Why does everybody have to be good at everything? The truth is, I mean, if you look at singers specialize based on what their voice is. They say, oh, you're this kind of a role. Oh, and now you've grown into this kind of a role. You've changed oh, you're this kind of singer. We are expected to play everything well, and as what you'll find, and of course you should, you need to be exposed to everything, absolutely. But what you will find as you go into your professional career is there are things that you do well, that agree with you, that you believe in, that you love, and there are other things that you don't. So find what means something to you and advocate for it. Take a second here just to take a question.
Okay. It says, hi, can you show your thumb position in the bow? Do you recommend trying different thumb positions? How do you practice the octaves in Tchaikovsky Last Rococo variation to change the color in your bow sound? Do you think about arm weight or fingers? Thank you for this great time.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, right hand thumb position, and to be perfectly honest, I have not touched the cello in 2 weeks since they canceled, so I'm not going to demonstrate the octaves in Rococo right now. However, I will talk, this is supposed to motivate me to get back into the world. So let me talk about the thumb position on the bow. My teacher was Zara Nelsova. A lot of people talked about how she always said you should push the thumb in straight with a straight thumb like you're pushing a thumbtack. That's not exactly what she said. What she used to say was, if you needed to exert a lot of pressure on something, you wouldn't do it with a curved thumb, you would do it with a straight thumb. However, she never asked us to play with a straight thumb. At the time when I was studying with her, I had a lot of kind of tension in the fingers, and it was helpful for me to use what we used to call a bow condom. I had a piece of surgical rubber tubing that went over the bow. I will say that those tend to mute the resonance of the bow. Having experimented with them on my bows and on students' bows, it definitely changes the sound of a bow. It definitely mutes some of the vibrations. So I would not recommend it if you don't need it. Sometimes it was useful for me to get through a period of time where I had some tension in my hand to get to a period when it helped solve that for a while because I had a firm grip. Honestly, what would really be ideal for people is if someone could invent like a rubber thimble made out of like surgical tubing, so you could just put it on your thumb and it wouldn't strangle the vibrations of the bow. That said, so when I played with Zara, I used a curved thumb like this. I don't know quite how to do this. A curved thumb like kind of in the traditional way you're taught. When I finally went to lighter, nice French bows, I was playing on about an 86 gram bow. Then when I went to about an 80, 81 gram bow, maybe 78 actually. Anyway, I discovered my thumb had gone to a straight position often when I was playing, kind of unnoticed, just very naturally, but it wasn't tense, there's no pushing in. Right around that time, I started watching videos of Casals and Feuermann and noticed that both of them often were playing with a straight thumb like this. What I use, the way I play now and the way I teach, I honestly believe that you need both. Because there are times when you want to be playing on the edge, of your hair, and you want that sound, arpeggione, Haydn D. You don't want a full flat hair sound there. And for that, I am playing more or less like this. I'm not sure if you can see that, but with straight fingers like this. However, there are other times where you want the full weight of the hand and flat hair. And for me, the rotation from edge of hair to flat hair is this. My thumb bends, it actually bends down, so it's kind of a counterweight. My fingers are going down, my thumb is like this, if you can see that. This is, and so I actually always want students to be able to do exercises where they roll the bow like this in their hand, that they have the flexibility of the thumb. Honestly, for me, when my thumb is curved, it's almost pushing down. My first finger is pushing down and the thumb is almost a counterweight. So it's actually kind of helping to torque the bow this way to put pressure as you go out towards the tip. Then the thumb comes kind of a little bit more up and helps me that way. So we'll come back to a few more of the technical questions, but let me get back to some repertoire issues for a second. I brought in a couple of things, and you're going to have to help me and tell me when these actually get in focus, because I'm trying to do this the right way. I brought in a couple of programs that I happen to have framed in the other room. Tell me when you can see this.
You can see it.
Can you read this?
Pretty much. If you want the details, then maybe bring it closer. A little up. That way. Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
This is a program of Gil Heifetz, a recital he did in 1920. What I wanted you to notice is the different parts. Okay, started with Vitaly Chacon, the same way he started his Carnegie debut. Then the Bruch Scotch Fantasy with piano, did a concerto with piano. Then the third part of the recital was 4 small pieces. We have Beethoven Romance, Beethoven Minuet, Mendelssohn on Wings of Song, Moszkowski Guitar, and then ends with the Wieniawski Polonaise. And there would have been some encores. A little bit, all right, one more. Let me know about this one.
Closer. A little up. A little that way. No. Yeah, a little up. A little further back. Should be good. Yeah.
A program of Manuel Feuermann from playing in Tucson, Arizona, actually, when I think this was 1941, probably. So here he does Beethoven A Major Sonata, Stravinsky Suite Italienne, then the Grieg Sonata. So this is actually a fairly meat and potatoes program for the kind of tour that this was. But then the ending, Bloch Prayer, Granados Spanish Dance, Popper Spinning Song.
You have 4 questions.
Okay, this is the way recital programs used to be constructed. There would be a kind of appetizer kind of piece, so something that kind of sets the mood. You know, it could be something like Vitaly Chacon or Bach Adagio, or maybe you plunge right into a piece of Beethoven, the Bach Gamba Sonata, something that opens the program. Then you have your substantial works, and then you close with a series of kind of small dessert pieces. Feuermann used to call them dirty little pieces. You know, the pieces that are these little 3.5 minute character pieces that are just utterly charming and to the audience. It's maybe not a coincidence that the time when classical music was at its greatest popularity was the time when the programs were really designed to be popular with the public. You know, you can imagine today you go to a program and it's like, okay, we're going to play all the Beethoven sonatas. We're going to hear 3 Brahms sonatas. We're going to hear, it's as if you go to a restaurant and they're going to say, you know, the appetizer is steak and the main course is steak and dessert is steak, and to drink, you know, steak shake. You need variety. The audience needs variety. You need variety as a performer. And we've lost so much of this repertoire. So much is gone. So much is ignored. And I understand, and I teach the core repertoire. We need it, but I also I'm trying with my graduate students at Rice. I try to say every recital program, I want you to have a piece that's nobody else plays. I want you to do something, make your own transcription, play some violin piece you love, do something that adds, that makes you special, that you do something that nobody else is doing, and that adds so that other cellists will see this and say, hey, I love this, I want to do this. So this, let me go into my moment of blatant promotion. This kind of exploration of repertoire, for me, the things that I have loved, a lot of them have kind of flowed from my love of Heifetz and my love of Fauré and kind of that era. And so I started becoming interested in some of the composers that he was interested in. Korngold, Rózsa, Castelnuovo-Tedesco, Franz Waxman. This led, I recorded years ago the Miklós Rózsa cello concerto. I performed the Korngold cello concerto. I'm actually going to do it here again next season. And then we did a revival a couple of years ago of the Castelnuovo-Tedesco cello concerto, which Piatigorsky debuted with Toscanini in the New York Phil in 1935, and then lay unperformed. He played it a few more times in Europe, and then it was basically never performed again up until we did it here in Houston. So that ended up becoming a recording from the live performances, and we filled out that disc with a bunch of transcriptions he made, that Castelnuovo-Tedesco made of 2 pieces from Ravel, Valley of the Bells, and Alvarado, the Figaro, and my own kind of derangement, and some Mozart transcriptions. And that led me kind of to an exploration of what other composers were living in California at this time. And those of you who've, I'm not going to belabor this because we just did a 2-part series on Cello Bello where I go through this and pretty well beat it to death, talking about the different composers who are out there, but it's an incredible collection of composers. And so we put together a recital program trying to feature as many of them as we can. And from that, actually, we ended up recording it, and that became the disc that was just released on March 13th. Can you see that? Is that right?
Closer.
Closer.
Yeah, pretty much. A little closer, maybe. Yeah.
So for those of you born after 1990, this is a CD, which is a silver thing that produces music. Or you can think of it as a coaster. As one of my students says, it's a coaster that reminds them to go to Spotify to listen to this. It's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, but there's, and it is available still as a CD. These are pieces that mean a lot to us. These are pieces, a lot of them are not known. One of them is a new transcription that I made of Rachmaninoff. A lot of them are violin transcriptions that we stole for the cello. This is more than just wanting people. I mean, I hope people like the recording, but what I really want to do is spark people's interest in this music and spark people's interest in thinking that, hey, I could do this, or I could do something else. I could go, hey, I like this. I like this composer. I don't like this one. I want to do this. I mean, one of the happiest things for me is to have been a part. I see so many people playing now the Rózsa Toccata Capricciosa, and I really believe in this piece. I think it's a fantastic piece, and I'm so happy to have had some part in promoting that piece and bringing it to people's attention and seeing that it starts to catch fire. I know people, mostly your repertoire is you see what your teacher assigns you or what you see in the people and other people in the studio are playing, but explore. There's so much out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Let's get to some back to some questions, just so we don't get too far in arrears.
Like 10. Okay. How does one find the lesser known works? You might have talked about this.
Well, okay, so the way I started for me was, I mean, the information's all out there. It's pretty easy on the internet now. It's amazing the resources that are out there. But I started with looking at the performers that I really loved. Who did that? Because I think when you have a certain stylistic sympathy, when you believe in kind of the same things musically, you're likely to like the same kind of composers and the same kind of works. So I started by pursuing a lot of the composers or a lot of the works that I loved that they had played, and it kind of built from there. That was there's obviously, look, we owe also a duty to modern composers. There are a lot of, if we don't try their pieces, we will never know who the great ones are. If nobody gets performed, not all modern composers are great. We know that. But if we don't play them, then we'll never know. I think befriend composers of your generation and encourage them and play them and find the ones that you really like and play them. That's also very important. Now, there are some people who are drawn to like Carter and Varese and Charles Wernin and things like that. And I mean, God bless them. I'm thrilled that there are people who are good at that and advocate that and do that. I don't think that's the only way you can add and expand to the repertoire, though. But I mean, just like, the people who love country music, and I don't, but I'm really glad that there are people who love it and advocate for it. We all have our interests. However, part of what it has to be is, our transcribe things you love. You love a Schubert song, you love a Schumann song, transcribe it. Chopin, was so much Chopin, a lot of it been transcribed already for the cello, but many composers work well in transcription. This is what people always did up until our day. You like a certain violin piece, why not play it on the cello? Just take it an octave down. You get used to the skill of sight reading an octave down in time. And if I spent a lot of time on those pieces. The more you do of them, the easier it gets. It never gets easy, but when you challenge yourself technically, and that's something we'll talk about in terms of general cello playing, but when you challenge yourself technically, you come. If you put your expectations here, your reality may come to here. But if you put your expectations here, your reality is going to come to here. You have to push yourself. You should always be pushing yourself beyond what you're finding. One other thing I'll say, Stacy Krim at the University of Carolina Greensboro collections is fantastic. And there's a lot of this stuff. I mean, obviously IMSLP is a great resource, but when you can't find something, when something's out of print, she is amazing about taking things. If they have it in their collection, she will scan it and send it to you, and it's been a fantastic resource for finding things that were out of print. So I hope that partially answers the question.
Okay. Can you, I don't know how to pronounce these, but can you give me your thoughts on Davidoff and Vutem's cello concertos, also Survey repertoire? They don't really get played as much.
Survey, I think I have a stack always. I'll tell you, I mean, I always have, what I used to do is to date me, but I used to go to Frank's Music Company and sometimes to Badelson's, but I like to go to Frank's because I like to hang out with Heidi. And they always she always had a bin of like random stuff. So I was always buying music before, so I always have had a stack of music that I'm curious about. Or now sometimes it's stuff I'll pull off of IMSLP when I'm browsing around. I'll pull it off and I'll always have a stack of things. There's a couple of Survey things in there. Davidoff concertos, I mean, look, it's not profound music, but not everything has to be profound music. Why? And this is part of what we're losing. We're losing the things that the audience could relate to and enjoy. Saint-Saëns violin concerto, the was it G minor, the famous the violin concerto, almost never played anymore. Vietnam 5, almost never played. Even Bruch Scotch Fantasy is becoming rare. Bruch 2, when do you hear it? These are pieces that audiences love, and it has become more and more a cycle of, okay, Beethoven, Brahms, Baird. Okay, we're talking about cello. You have Dvorak, you have Haydn, Shostakovich, Schumann, Elgar. We've become an ever narrowing circle. What happened to Lalo Cello Concerto? It's beautiful. It's not as profound as the most profound piece of Brahms or Beethoven, but not everything has to be steak. So the Vietnam Cello Concerti, I bought the music for both and I played through them, and I thought they were good, but I didn't spend enough time on them to fall in love with them, listen to the recordings, and I would happily teach them. I'm not sure, it's not something that I fell in love with enough that I felt like, oh, I need to find a place to program this. The Davidoff, I think, are great pedagogical tools because it's kind of like, and it's gets you what you get from an etude, but you get music in it too. The Servet pieces are, again, they're fantastic. They're great little technical pieces. I think Joel Krosnick used to play them. I think he might have put a recording of those out a long time ago, in the days before CDs. So, yes, if you like them, advocate for them. That's what's important. It doesn't even matter what I think. You will be a powerful advocate for the things you believe in.
The Max Reger cello suites are pretty amazing, but I'm surprised how few cellists are playing them, or in some cases even know about them. Would you encourage your student to play them?
I absolutely believe. I particularly like Reger 1. Reger 2 is also very interesting. I think they're now. Reger that's one of those things that it seems to divide people. People either hate it or they love it. And I think they're quite amazing. Feuerman loved them. Zara played them. I'll tell you that Zara's debut recital in New York City was Bach 6, Reger 2, and Kodály, and this was at a time when not everybody and their dog was playing Kodály. And it was completely solo. That was her New York debut, and it was something it might have been the first time anyone had ever done a full solo cello recital. It was certainly had to be one of the first times, and she really wanted a program that would not just be like, okay, another debut, another sonata opener. She wanted something that would be really striking. I actually made a little list, just going through of some of the solo cello things that I think just going through a quick Wikipedia list, some of the things that I've wanted to learn. The Bloch suites I think are beautiful. I particularly like Bloch number 1. There's a David Diamond sonata. I'll give a shout out to my friend Tom Flaherty. He has a semi-suite that's very clever and nice. Goliov has a piece. Oswaldo Goliov has a piece. Jacques Ibert has 2 pieces, an Etude Caprice and a Girzolana. Khachaturian, Sonata Fantasy. Kodály also has a Capriccio for solo cello. Persichetti has a sonata. Piatigorsky wrote 2 little pieces, and also Prokofiev March. Perfect little encore pieces. The Regers, I have down the Rózsa Toccata Capriccioso we talked about. There's Kosman made an arrangement of Schubert's Erlkönig, which is pretty cool. Sibelius, Theme and Variations, which has kind of been rediscovered and brought back. 2 suites of Boris Tchaikovsky. Chepnin, if I'm saying that correctly, has a suite that a student brought in that I thought was quite brilliant. The Toch Impromptus, that is all on our Exiles CD, Walton Passacaglia, and then Weinberg, who's a very popular, very hot composer right now, wrote 4 solo sonatas and the 24 preludes. And if you don't know it, Isai also wrote a sonata for solo cello, not just a transcription. There's a transcription of Ballade too, if you want to do that. But Isai wrote a sonata for solo cello, and interesting little factoid about that. Isai could play not only viola but also cello. So if you get the Henley edition, those fingerings are Isai's fingerings for cello. He used to have, like when they would have quartet evenings, if they were short a violist, he'd play viola. If they were short a cellist, he'd play cello. Talented dude. So I absolutely believe in the Regers personally. And again, advocate for what you believe in. But there's so much out there. I mean, I'm trying to figure out a way to say this the right way, because it's been really positive and inspiring to see on Facebook so many people posting Bach, and it's great, and it's undeniably great music. But I would still, look at the list we just talked about, and that's just a tiny list. I would be even more excited if I could see a few people posting things that were not Bach, that were like, oh, I've always wanted to hear this piece. We have this time now. We have nothing but time. We have this time to explore repertoire. Okay.
In order for you to extend your technique, you devote a certain amount of hours to scales, arpeggios, and double stop scales, bow exercises, and what. So, for you to be able to find technical ease when playing like a piano or violin piece.
Yes, absolutely. Scales are the foundation, but why? I mean, Heifetz, the old quote of Heifetz, he said, if I had half an hour to practice, I'd spend 20 minutes on scales and the other 10 on just the hardest parts of the piece. Scales are the maintenance, but you have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Scales and double stops are fantastic. Thirds, sixths, octaves really sets the hand position. You can't do stupid things with your hands. I should have a cello maybe. But yeah, I mean, you can't do all the stupid technical things we do. You can't do those when you're playing double stops. It fixes things right away. It also fixes your sense of intonation. Use double stops to build your sense of intonation. Then the regular scales. Are you practicing for intonation? Are you practicing for speed? Are you practicing for fluency? Because that's one kind of practice. Are you practicing? Are you using it to practice something in the bow? You should always know what you're using it to practice, because the scales are the blank canvas, and you use that to practice a thing. You use it. Don't try to just play scale to play a scale. That doesn't mean anything. Are you practicing your coordination? Okay, coordination for what? What coordination of the bow and left hand? We'll call them back. Are you practicing coordination? Know exactly what you're doing and how you're using it. Of course, that's always true. That's what you get as you get smarter about practicing. Look, when I was 15, 16, I mean, I knew I was supposed to practice scales and double stops, but I just sit there like... for an hour trying to get these things in tune, and then I'd come out and I'd like, what did I accomplish? I have no idea. I'd go into so jump around, keep your brain alert, because your brain is where the learning is happening. You're not training your fingers, okay? Your fingers are your fingers. Doesn't matter. You're training your brain, and if your brain's not there, if your brain doesn't know exactly what you're doing, you don't get any benefit from it. So know what you're doing, know how you use the scales. The other thing, all right, honestly, I haven't, and I've told people this a lot, but I have a stack of like violin pieces like this, and the amount I play in public is like this of them, and probably the amount I should play in public is probably like this. But I like to use those to push my technique. I mean, because they're fun to play. Because, I mean, when I got Varga's transcription of Tzagan, I didn't think I was ever going to play it in public. I just couldn't stop working on it because it was so much fun. The same thing with the Waxman Carmen Fantasy that's on the Exiles disc, which is, I think, the hardest piece I've played, and I would not have been able to play if I hadn't kind of had these obsessions with going through, like, Zigeunerweisen and Paganini 24 and all the other stuff all the other transcriptions that kind of led up to that. I never would have been able to come close, but it was just so much fun to work on. And that's the thing. Find some technical things that are also not like pulling teeth, that you'll enjoy working on because of the musical part of it, so that it's not all like eating broccoli just so you can get somewhere. One more thing. Practice slides. There's not enough in the etudes or in the scales of slides. So practice slides. Just practice sliding 5-10 minutes a day, because all the theory in the world does no good if you don't practice it. I mean, if you read 12 books on how to hit a tennis ball, it doesn't do you any good unless you go out and hit tennis balls. So practice slides. Okay.
I'm skipping to a question from Cello Bello, and then I'll go for the rest. It's from their YouTube live audience. Any opinions on the Vaughan Williams Dark Pastoral for cello and orchestra?
Vaughan Williams.
Yeah.
I don't know it. Now I'm really curious. A dark pastoral?
Yeah.
Interesting. And again, Vaughan Williams, I so often don't know what to think of Vaughan Williams. Sometimes I think it's fantastic, and sometimes It brings to mind Copland's, well, Copland was kind of nasty about it, but he said, like, listening to a Vaughan Williams symphony is like staring at a cow for 3 hours. I don't usually feel that way. I usually like Vaughan Williams. I'd be curious about that. I also did, if you want to talk about, let me just run down my little list. I made a little list of cello concertos. Concertos, it's difficult to advocate for repertoire. You can do this in your recitals, you can do this in your studies. It's hard to do in concertos because they want to sell tickets. And if your name's not Yo-Yo Ma, it's very hard to get to sell any cellist. It's always, why are there fewer cellists on any subscription series than pianists or violinists? Because they sell less, honestly, and they always have historically. In fact, we're probably doing, from a historical perspective, better than we used to, but there are, you get 1 or 2 cellists, so it's very hard. They're not really often wanting to be experimental with the repertoire, so you have to find a conductor who's interested, who's kind of got the same bug of like, oh, I love this piece, I want to do this, or you have to, if you are in a situation where it's your own orchestra. What I've been able to do with Houston, they've been good enough to trust me so that we've been able to do some things that I've always wanted to play. And if I were a guest artist with these orchestras, they probably wouldn't book it, but because I have a solo slot anyway, and they figure, they're gonna try to sell any tickets they sell with whatever they put on the second half. They've let me do the Castelnuovo-Tedesco. Then the year before last, we did the D'Albert Concerto, which I think is a beautiful piece. It's very romantic and very schmaltzy, but this is me, and not this is the kind of music I like. So also Kurt Atterberg, beautiful stuff. Again, kind of in the romantic vein. C.P. Bach wrote 3 concertos. Bernstein, Meditation for Mass, also can be done. The recital program can be done pretty well with piano. 12 concertos from Boccherini, and they're beautiful. The Bridge Oratorio, if you don't know it. Castelnuovo-Tedesco, we talked about. Delius wrote a cello concerto. Dochnani Concertstück is great. Great, also kind of, Eleanor Schoenfeld made me learn that. Enescu, Symphony Concertante, fantastic. The Finzi Concerto, a few people know. Beautiful kind of epic Elgar style. Glier wrote a beautiful kind of romantic Russian style. Friedrich Gulda, I think some people know, is kind of a very funky piece with its amplified cello and drum set, and if that's kind of your thing, that's great. Not a lot of people know Glazunov wrote a Concerto Ballata, a beautiful piece. There's George Zell did a transcription for Feuermann of the Mozart oboe/flute concerto. That's fun just to play some Mozart. There's the Holst Invocation. Paul Wan, the J-U-O-N, another romantic Russian, wrote a Mysterio. The Korngold Concerto, which I'm playing next year. I'm also pairing that, because it's short, we're pairing it with the first concerto of Mio, which I love also. Raff, if you don't know the composer Raff, beautiful stuff. Joachim Raff wrote 2 cello concertos. There's the Anton Reiche that Feuermann recorded, and his brother, his uncle, I guess, Joseph, wrote 3 cello concertos. Nino Rota, the Godfather music guy, wrote 2 cello concertos. Miklós Rózsa, cello concerto. Tansman, the 2 Vietnam we talked about, Sir Arthur Sullivan. This is just, and these are just the ones that interest me, let alone, if your tastes are more kind of into modernism, and there's tons out there, there's tons more Baroque. We don't think about what you're adding to the world. Think about what you're adding for your colleagues, for your audiences. Is there going to be something really amazingly profound about the way you play Elgar compared to the way the last 25 people before you played Elgar? I mean, you have to learn it. You have to learn the canon, but don't make this the whole focus of what you do. Because you can do so much good for all of us by advocating for some of this repertoire. Okay, where are we?
You published syllabi such as the ABRSM, Trinity Guildhall encourage or discourage discovery of unplayed, underplayed cello repertoire? Are there organized resources available to students, teachers, other than the above for underplayed repertoire?
That's a good question. I have to be honest. We don't really use those in America, so I'm not super familiar with them. But I would expect that they probably limit the repertoire. Now, Ansi had the article, how about the Instead article that was on Cello Bello a couple of posts ago, sometime this week, talking about if you were thinking about programming this, consider this instead. I think probably what we need is something like that. Though I have to say I was thrilled to hear from a colleague of mine that they are now, at the university she teaches at in Germany, all the cellists have to learn a single piece kind of for their jury in the spring. And that piece this year is going to be Rózsa, Toccata Capricciosa. So if you're teaching, you can do a lot to help expand this, but I think we need to make more things kind of like Ansi's article available, and kind of like what I tried to do with those two parts. We're talking about the repertoire that's out there, saying, because if nobody's heard it, then it's kind of hard to advocate it for it. It's just a name in a book. So everybody needs to play a part. Everybody needs to take a piece, a piece or two. Make every recital you have, put one piece that nobody's going to know, that you believe in. A transcription of your own, or one of these great pieces for cello that are out there.
Okay. What inspired you to start making your own rosin blends? What qualities were you looking for that you felt missing from commercially available rosin? How are the results so far?
So where's my, there's a reason I have this. The reason I have this prior to the end of civilization. I got this for working with rosins. I have to say the inspiration for all the adjustments and all that part of the cello side has come from Italo Babini, who was one of my great mentors, one of my great friends. He lives in San Diego now, 91 years old. He was Aldo Pereso's half-brother. It was his father that taught both of them, and it's his father, Tommaso Babini, who came over from Italy and kind of taught all the great Brazilian cellists of that generation, including Aldo and Italo. His father kind of had this recipe for making cello rosin, blending bass and violin rosin. And the truth is, look, rosins have different qualities. Okay, rosins have the quality of kind of a hardness versus a stickiness. If you've ever tried bass rosin, it's very soft and very sticky. If you put only bass rosin on a cello bow, it feels like you're just trapped in the mud. But we mostly use violin rosin. There is no such thing really as cello rosin. I mean, maybe Kolstein makes something they call a cello rosin, but we're using viola, cello, and violin are basically using the same rosin, and our strings have different needs. Our needs are somewhere between what the bass and what the violin needs. Now, I know a lot of people are big on the Tartini rosin, or whatever it's called these days. I tried that. It wasn't quite what I was looking for, and partly what I wanted by experimenting, and mostly so far I'm just experimenting with different blends, though I have done of existing rosins, though I have tried melting down some actual pine resins and using different additives. But what I'm trying to do is find that balance of stickiness, enough initial stick, because we need more than violinists need, and then but not so sticky that it needs to give after that. It's a stick-slip ratio. I'm closing in on something which is a blend of 2 different bass rosins and a violin rosin, and there's a lot of more experiments, and I'm cutting it with a little bit of turpentine. And so I've been, I was bringing in for my students and for my colleagues at work different rosins to sample to try and get feedback every week, and that's another project that's been waylaid by the quarantine. But it's important to experiment. We're talking about experimenting with repertoire. It's important to experiment with setup. Talk to luthiers when they're setting up your cello. Understand your own measurements. Understand this part of the cello. It's important to understand every part of everything you do, because having a cello that responds well is half the battle. You could practice to death, and if your cello sounds bad, you're never going to solve that unless you can solve this part of it too. So that's part of our job as cellists. If you want to sound good, you have to figure out how to make it sound good.
How do you feel about students taking these newer or not so common pieces to auditions for colleges or festivals?
It's a balance, and that's, look, I mean, partly the reason we end up now. Competitions, sometimes these can be a benefit. Sometimes, I mean, it's one of the kind of just natural truths is if I listen to somebody playing a piece I know versus the same person at the same level playing a piece I don't know, they sound better on the piece I don't know. It's just because I know, look, if I see somebody starts the fourth movement of Elgar, I know exactly what I'm looking for to see where their coordination is, to see what they do with the vibrato, to see how they make this phrase. I know exactly the key points I'm looking for to evaluate them. If they're playing a piece I've never heard before, I'm just kind of sitting there like, okay. And so it can work to your advantage, but but it has to be a balance. There also has to be something where you show like, okay, it can't be all strange pieces. It should be a balance of like, hey, here's a really interesting piece I'm doing, but also here's a Bach suite and here's, a movement of Beethoven so that I can show you, so that you can evaluate me in something you're comfortable in too. There was for recitals or for competitions?
For colleges or festivals.
So it has to be, and sometimes they actually put a split. Often they will say of a standard concerto or that, and the why, because that is a case where we really do we need to compare apples to apples. Actually, when I do auditions, when I set audition lists for Houston, I actually require the first movement of Haydn D major concerto and the first movement of the Dvorak concerto, just the expositions, because I want to compare apples to apples. I want players that have musical personality and interests and explore the repertoire and all that, and that's who we hire. But when we're actually trying to say, compare this person to this person in a very critical way, I find the fairest way to do it is really to have the exact same repertoire. So often it's forbidden, but if there is a chance, find a place in an audition program to express your individuality. For instance, I had one of my high school students who went off and went to Colburn. I had him audition with the Rózsa Toccata Capricciosa, in which he played beautifully, and it made a big impression on them.
Good. How do you choose a repertoire when your audience is uneducated? Are the lesser played pieces as digestible for the untrained ear as the classics?
It depends on the piece, of course, but honestly, I mean, the truth is most of the audience out there today knows Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Mozart, maybe Brahms. Those are the names they know. They don't know really what they wrote for the cello. They are in your hands. I mean, if you think that they are mostly coming to hear beautiful music, and they're coming to hear you advocate for something. And look, the kinds of pieces that I like that work for me are things that I think are audience friendly. And I would highly encourage you to consider ending a recital with a couple of pieces, with a couple of desserts, with a couple of these little pieces that are really beautiful and work well for the audience, and maybe challenge them somewhere in the course of the recital. Maybe it's not all, everything's a matter of balance. It's about a program. Making a program is an art form in itself. Finding that balance between things that the audience will love and things that they will think about later on and maybe come to love, and of course, look, we need to represent the pillars too. But really, we are at the point where people don't know that much about music anyway, and there's not much of your audience, even the most educated who love music, don't know much, and those who are educated will love hearing something new.
Often Bach has numerous duos/duets, but personally I rarely see them in published collections or see them in syllabi. What gives? Are they technically not accessible to many students? Do they lack pedagogical value, musical value?
Bach duets?
Offenbach.
Oh, Offenbach. I thought you said Offenbach.
Oh.
Offenbach, I think they're awesome. I don't understand. They're technically hard. I am utterly, and again, I think, look, as teachers, we tend to teach what we know, okay? It's always a challenging situation to give advice on a piece you don't play, and that is, so it's always more comfortable to guide students into what we know. So you have to kind of, but if a student comes in and they're saying, hey, I'm really excited about this piece, I want to play it, I'm like, let's do it, and we'll learn it together. And sometimes a student brings in a piece, and then afterwards I think, like, God, I want to learn that piece too. Sometimes it inspires me, sometimes I show them repertoire, sometimes they show me repertoire. So if you bring it in and you are excited, I think your teacher will want to do it for you. But if you ask your teacher, if you wait for your teacher, honestly, we are used to doing the same thing, and we're likely going to talk about pieces we know and pieces we've taught before and push you that way. So, and you'll want some of that, you want to get from your teachers what they know best, but spice it up. It doesn't have to be everything new, but bring in a few pieces, and eventually your teacher will thank you for it. I know I have for some of my students.
Okay. What is the process you take for gaining access to scores which might not be available in American libraries? Something like the Fauré Sonata later orchestrated into a concerto, which doesn't show up in any American library and is out of print.
These are tough. Interlibrary loan is a great program when it exists in one of the libraries. And the only other, make friends with your librarian. They live for this stuff. They know the resources. But to get things out of print, sometimes you can find descendants of the family. You can find where the composer's papers are stored. For instance, one of the Castelnuovo-Tedesco Mozart transcriptions we did on that CD was in the Library of Congress. He'd written it for cello, but it had never been published. It had never been done anywhere. And his daughter, Diana Castelnuovo-Tedesco, was able to get us access to the music from the Library of Congress. So often the papers are held in a collection somewhere. More and more things are coming online. That's usually your best resource, family or collections of papers. And as I said, those archives of cellists, particularly the UNC Greensboro has got a great archive. I think they just got Starker's papers too. So they have a great collection of all these things. What time is it, by the way?
It's almost 7, but keep going.
Okay.
Or almost 8.
That if it's in one of those collections, Stacy's fantastic about getting it for you. Now you're freaking me out.
I'm just looking for a comment, but keep going.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, you have to think of this kind of as part of our duty to the cello, but it's fun. I'll tell you, for me, it was a fascinating experience when I got the Castelnuovo-Tedesco, and there was no recording, there was nothing to go off of but the music. There's no tempo marking, so I had to sit and figure out, and of course, sometimes we play modern pieces, which have never been played before, but often you're in conjunction with the composer, and it's often in kind of a modern idiom, which is different. This is a piece that was basically in a traditional idiom, and like the second movement marked allegro gentile, the gentle allegro. What tempo is that? And I had to start and try all different kinds of tempos, and eventually something began to feel organic, and you begin to understand the music enough. But it's a fascinating process. Also, for instance, I'll tell you, when I wanted to do a solo cello recital at Rice, I set out deliberately with often if you get a theme and you can kind of build around that. A lot of the recitals I've done at Rice have had some kind of theme to them, because that makes it easier to kind of think about what pieces you want to put together. In the case of the solo cello recital, I said I want no Bach and no Kadai. Why? Not because they're not great pieces, but because they're great pieces that many great cellists have done already. I want to advocate for some other things. So we did Reger First Sonata, Bloch First Sonata, the Zai. We did the North American, probably the Western Hemisphere premiere of the Sibelius Theme and Variations, which is music I got from a friend on Facebook who happened to have a copy from his professor, who had it from, before it was published. The Rózsa Toccata Capricciosa, Casado Sonata, and then that was with Paganini 24 as an encore. And then actually the encore after that was actually Casado's arrangement of a Chopin etude from piano, which was, again, fantastic. I just set out with a general idea of where I wanted to go, and then kind of filled in. And honestly, there was another recital's worth of other solo cello pieces that I would have loved to have done. But it's out there. It's out there for you.
Could you talk about avoiding a trap in the practice room where we may become convinced that we are projecting our sound/vibrato and phrasing, yet very little comes through, and when we get on stage, or worse, to even a listener sitting right next to you?
This is a big thing, and it's a big problem because most of these conservatories have small practice rooms, and you can play on the fingerboard and it sounds like Rostropovich on steroids, and everything sounds huge. And also, and I'm as guilty of this as many, but you put your head down here, it sounds huge. If you, this is not my normal cello, which is another long story, which relates to, but maybe we'll save that for another time because we don't have a lot of time. This difference, putting your head down versus putting your head up. All right, first of all, that's one big thing, because everything sounds big when your head is down here. But you get used to playing on the fingerboard, and I don't care. You can, they talk about, oh, big heavy bow, heavy arm, big guy, big sound. I don't care if you're 500 pounds with a 100-gram bow. If you play on the fingerboard, it will not make sound. And if you're an 80-pound girl with a 78-gram bow, if you play on the bridge, it will make sound. The cello makes sound. Where you place the bow. But people don't want to play on the bridge. Why? Because it sounds, you play that in a small room, it sounds terrible. It sounds gritty. So really, the solution is you've got to, any chance you get to practice in a bigger room, especially in a big hall, really changes. It's interesting, when I get the chance to play on stage in the hall and practice there, you realize you phrase differently in a big space than you do in a small space. And part of what is difficult for people coming for orchestra auditions is you're in the small little warm-up room where you sound huge, and then you get on stage, and on most stages, there's maybe one or two that are very loud, but mostly you suddenly feel like, and so you try to recreate the sound you're used to, and suddenly you get tight, and you try and do it by pressing. You have to practice by the bridge. If there's anything that will make a bigger difference in your life, yes, I know it's going to sound gross at first, but it will clean up when you can play clean by the bridge, because what you want to do in performance is to be able to do less than you've practiced, not more than you've practiced. You want to be able to use a little less effort. So you want to take what you practiced here and go back there. So you can take moderate that so you're less tense, because you're going to be a little more tense when you get in front of, if for performance, in front of an audience. Practice by the bridge. And especially if, I don't, probably not people who are playing in professional orchestras watching this now, but it is, especially in the years I spent in the section, is very hard because you don't want to stick out and you want to blend, and it's very easy to get in the habit of playing always on the fingerboard. It's very easy from these small practice rooms. Practice in big spaces. If you have to practice in a small space, like when I'm warming up to go on stage, I always use a big rubber practice mute in the small room, because the last thing I want is to feel like I sounded big in the practice room and sound small on stage. I'd rather go from feeling like this and then feel like at least, oh, thank God, at least it feels a little bit better to go on stage. Or you can use clothespins, are a little less distorting for intonation if you put clothespins on the bridge. Or you can put a little bit of I cut an earplug like in half, like a foam earplug in half, and put those in if you have to practice in a small room. I was just in the Juilliard practice rooms, and they're amazingly maybe the worst of any school I've been to. They weren't like that when I was there, but that was before the $100 million renovation. They're still like that. It's deafening to play in there. And of course, it's terrible for you. Practice even outdoors if you can.
Okay, probably two more questions. Could you show us how you train the fourth finger and thumb? Could you show us how to train the thumb and fourth finger and thumb position, particularly related to vibrato?
There's not, look, I use a lot more fourth finger and thumb position than most people would tell you to. I like all my students. Okay, Zara had us do all the Greutzmacher Book 2 thumb position exercises because she thought it was very important for strengthening the fourth finger. The other, so they use a lot of fourth finger there. But look, it doesn't. It's a little bit like the old thing about the dog walking on its hind legs, and it's not that it's done well, it's that it's done at all. If you can use your fourth finger at all, if you can get used to that, using this fourth finger, then that means your third finger's in a good position. What usually happens is the hand turns like this, and so you're vibrating across the string like this. Well, look, if I'm vibrating, look, down here we're vibrating this way, right? So the oscillation, you get almost it's parallel, perpendicular to the string, you get almost the full oscillation. Now, if you go to the other way, if you went to this extreme, you're oscillating. If you're going back and forth, you're barely getting any oscillation. You could move, I could go narrow or wide, and it's basically the same modulation. You can't control the width of your vibrato then. So it's very important. Now, of course, we can't be perpendicular because there's a cello in the way. But it's very important that you not be too much this way. Also, it makes it hard to play fast. It makes it hard to play. If you have to kind of readjust to get to the third finger, you often see this. Or if your thumb's up here, which is another problem. Zara used to call this the hitchhiking thumb. If your thumb is not that your thumb should be pressed, but your thumb should be comfortably there. When your thumb is up like this, it's a sign of tension, but it also creates tension. You'll never be able to solve it without getting comfortable in that. So the other thing is Zara, for the top note of our arpeggios, she had us use fourth finger instead of third, coming to the top of an arpeggio. Basically, the more you use fourth finger, the more natural it begins to. Now I'm using it kind of and melodically as a finger. And again, if you want to learn how to vibrate it, even better, but it doesn't. Let me talk about one thing kind of peripheral to that, which is a little bit of an issue that is kind of driving me crazy. I'm seeing some people, I've seen people being very, very doctrinaire about you never collapse your fingers in thumb position. And I think that's crazy because just go watch videos of great cellists, watch videos of Piatigorsky with his long fingers and everything is collapsed. Now, I know why they say that. I understand, because if you can only play with collapsed, if your fingers are weak and they can only play collapsed, then you're in trouble because it's like only being able to walk with without bending your knees. but your fingers should be strong enough that you can go from anywhere, from collapse to non-collapse to straight. You should be able to do any angle at any time. This needs to be strong. Now, if you're only like, if it's just collapsing like this because you have no strength, then your teacher's right, okay? But you absolutely need sometimes, you know, if I'm then, you know, then I would play this with a straight or maybe even slightly collapsed finger. Now, it's not completely caved, but it's straight because I need to find a way to fit that in to get the vibrato I need. Now, if I'm going fast, I wouldn't, you know. I don't know where anything is in this cello. I've been practicing 2 weeks. But anyway, then of course, you know, the lighter it is, the faster it is, then the more I can play on the side of the string and the more I can keep the bent fingers. But you need to have that option. You need to be able to go from the full range of straight all the way through.
Okay, you're past 8, so make this quick, but do you have any recommendations for how to get more comfortable with the thumb position fingerings in which a backward extended 1 is followed by a forward extended 2? I'm thinking about some Kreuzmacher etudes.
I mean, I think that, honestly, I mean, I don't know how to answer this productively. I think the Kreuzmacher etudes are a good way. You know, the point of these etudes and the Kosman, actually, the thumb position part of the Kosman book is very good too. And there's a couple of other books that are very good on this. But again, the point of the Kreuzmacher etudes and things like that, the point of doing things hard is not that you're going to play the Kreuzmacher etudes beautifully. When you do the fingered octaves in Kreuzmacher, it's not about making your fingered octaves good. It's about making your regular octaves seem like, oh, thank God, it's just regular octaves. It's about building that solid base. So when you can do this, then the regular octaves are not a big deal. It's kind of the same thing. Do it in the Kreuzmacher. Now, trying to think it's, again, that's a case where I absolutely, to fit that in, to be able to stretch, I have to collapse both my first and second finger to make the stretch happen. But without, that's something I'll have to look exactly at the examples to see that. But if you want to put something in the comments, I can take a look at it afterwards and see if I have any more useful thoughts. We got one more?
No, that's it. But people want you to post the list that you have.
Oh, okay. It's in my handwritten scroll.
Post it on Cello Bello after.
But yeah, and that's, I mean, that's just an easy perusal. The sonatas, the small pieces that are out there, it's an incredibly wide world, and you will be doing something unique and special and helping all of us. I think, you know, I started, you know, when we're young, we all kind of want to make our name and we want to make our career and all this, but what I will tell you that what has become most important to me from everything I've done is not the idea that someone would say like, oh, he can do this, but oh, maybe I can do this too. I mean, look, there's nothing special about me. Anything I can do, you can do. If you're willing to persist at it, if you're willing to kind of, and we persist at the things we love. So take the repertoire you love, follow that, and yeah, I'll try and post these. I think I'll write them out because my handwriting. So maybe we'll continue and get into some more technical stuff if these keep going in the next couple of weeks. But thanks to Paul and thanks to all the guys at Cello Bello. And also we have those 2 articles relating to the Hollywood composers, the composers that were in LA in that era. And I try to talk a lot about the repertoire that's in there. I noticed there's a lot of Ernst Krenek that I didn't mention in that article, but he's not for me, but it's not to say he isn't a great composer that wouldn't be for someone. So I guess that's it for now. I will try to not delete this and see you soon. Thanks.
There's a...
Yes, what?